Nero's death and the collapse of Rome. Imagine ruling the greatest empire the world had ever seen. An empire that stretched from the misty hills of Britain to the scorching deserts of Egypt. A realm connected by thousands of miles of roads, guarded by nearly 30 powerful legions, and home to more than 60 million people. Now imagine that, overnight, its ruler was gone. No clear successor. No peaceful transfer of power. No certainty about who would wear the imperial purple next. This is the story of one of the darkest and most dramatic years in Roman history. A single year when 4 different men claimed the title of emperor, when Roman soldiers slaughtered fellow Romans, and when the greatest empire on earth nearly destroyed itself from within. The year was 69 AD, remembered forever as the year of the 4 emperors. But to understand how Rome reached the brink of collapse, we must first return to the final days of Emperor Nero. For centuries, Romans had hated the idea of kings. Their ancestors had overthrown the last Roman king nearly 500 years earlier and proudly established the Roman Republic. Even after Augustus became Rome's first emperor in 27 BC, the illusion remained that Rome was still a republic. Emperors called themselves first citizen rather than king, carefully avoiding titles that reminded Romans of monarchy. Yet everyone knew who truly held power. The emperor commanded the armies. The emperor controlled the treasury. The emperor appointed governors. And ultimately, the emperor decided who lived and who died. For more than 100 years, this immense authority had remained within a single family, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Augustus had founded it. Tiberius expanded it. Caligula shocked it. Claudius strengthened it. And finally came Nero. When Nero became emperor in 54 AD, he was only 16 years old. At first, many believed he would become one of Rome's finest rulers. Guided by experienced advisors like the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus, the young emperor governed reasonably well during his early years. Taxes remained manageable. Trade flourished. The frontiers were secure. Public entertainment kept the people satisfied. Rome appeared stable. But as Nero grew older, everything changed. The emperor became increasingly obsessed with his own image. He considered himself not merely a ruler, but an artist. He wrote poetry. He performed music. He acted on stage before enormous audiences. To many Romans, especially members of the Senate, such behavior was deeply embarrassing. An emperor was expected to lead armies and govern wisely, not perform like an entertainer. Nero, however, cared little for tradition. He demanded admiration, and he expected everyone to applaud, whether they wanted to or not. Then came one of the most infamous disasters in Roman history. In July of 64 AD, a fire erupted in Rome. The flames spread rapidly through the crowded streets lined with wooden buildings. Driven by strong winds, the fire burned for 6 terrifying days before finally subsiding. Large portions of the city were reduced to ashes. Thousands lost their homes. Many lost their lives. Rumors immediately spread throughout the empire. Some whispered that Nero himself had ordered the city burned so he could rebuild it according to his own vision. Ancient writers disagreed about whether its luxurious halls, artificial lakes, marble walls, and golden decorations convinced many Romans that the emperor cared more about his own comfort than the suffering of his people. To silence criticism, Nero searched for someone else to blame. He chose a small religious group that few Romans understood. The Christians. Many were arrested. Some were executed in brutal public spectacles. Others were burned alive. These persecutions would forever shape Christian memory of Nero as one of history's greatest tyrants. But inside Rome, resentment continued to grow. The emperor's extravagance drained the imperial treasury. To finance enormous building projects and lavish celebrations, Nero imposed heavier taxes and confiscated property from wealthy nobles. Members of the Senate feared him. Many aristocrats hated him. Military commanders questioned his judgment. Even ordinary citizens, once entertained by his performances, began wondering whether Rome still had a competent ruler. Then, in 68 AD, everything began to unravel. Far from Rome, in the province of Gaul, Governor Gaius Julius Vindex openly rebelled against Nero. Although the revolt was eventually defeated, it inspired other governors to challenge the emperor. One of them was Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Hispania. Galba was almost the complete opposite of Nero. He was elderly, disciplined, Experienced, a respected military commander with decades of service behind him. Unlike Nero, he projected the image of an old-fashioned Roman devoted to duty rather than luxury. When Galba declared that he would no longer recognize Nero's authority, the political earthquake had begun. More dangerous still, influential officials inside Rome abandoned the emperor. Perhaps the most devastating betrayal came from the Praetorian Guard. Originally created to protect the emperor, this elite force stationed in the capital had become one of the most powerful political organizations in the empire. Their loyalty often determined who ruled Rome. When their commander accepted promises of generous rewards from Galba's supporters, the Guard turned against Nero. The emperor suddenly discovered that the soldiers sworn to protect him had chosen someone else. The Senate quickly followed. They declared Nero a public enemy. The man who had ruled the Roman world now found himself abandoned almost overnight. Friends disappeared. Servants fled. Even members of his household refused to stand beside him. The emperor who had once commanded millions could barely find anyone willing to help him escape. Realizing capture was inevitable, Nero fled Rome. He sought refuge in a countryside villa owned by one of his remaining loyal supporters. There, surrounded by only a handful of companions, he faced an impossible decision. If captured alive, he would almost certainly be executed publicly, humiliated, mocked, displayed before the people he once ruled. Instead, Nero chose another path. On June 9, 68 AD, with assistance from one of his servants, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty took his own life. Ancient historians record that his final words were, "What an artist dies in me." Whether he truly spoke those words remains uncertain, but the phrase perfectly captured the emperor's personality. Even in death, Nero thought of himself not as Rome's ruler, but as a performer. With his suicide, more than a century of dynastic rule came to an abrupt end. For the first time since Augustus, there was no obvious successor. The throne stood empty, and across the empire, ambitious generals began asking themselves the same dangerous question. Why should someone else become emperor when I command an entire army? The Senate wasted little time. Galba was officially recognized as the new emperor. Many Romans breathed a sigh of relief. The nightmare, they believed, was finally over. Galba entered Rome presenting himself as the man who would restore discipline, honesty, and traditional Roman values. After years of Nero's extravagance, many welcomed the change. But Galba made a critical mistake almost immediately. Before becoming emperor, his supporters had promised enormous cash rewards to the Praetorian Guard. Once in power, Galba refused to pay. According to ancient historians, he declared, "It is my custom to recruit soldiers, not buy them." The statement may have sounded noble, but politically, it was disastrous. The Praetorian Guard had expected fortunes. Instead, they received nothing. At the same time, Galba began removing officials connected to Nero. He punished suspected opponents. He demanded strict financial discipline. He canceled expensive gifts. He refused lavish celebrations. While these policies may have strengthened the treasury, they made him deeply unpopular among nearly everyone who had helped him seize power. Even worse, Galba was already 70 years old. Many questioned whether he possessed the energy to lead an empire facing growing unrest. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away along the Rhine frontier, powerful legions watched events unfold with increasing frustration. These battle-hardened soldiers had spent years defending Rome's borders, yet they felt ignored, unappreciated. Their loyalty, they believed, deserved greater rewards. And unlike politicians in Rome, they possessed something far more powerful: entire armies. Within months of Nero's death, dangerous whispers spread through military camps across the empire. Perhaps Galba was not the right man after all. Perhaps another commander would make a better emperor. Perhaps the fate of Rome should be decided not by the Senate, but by the legions. Those whispers would soon become open rebellion, and the Roman Empire was about to descend into one of the bloodiest civil wars in its history. Four men fight for one throne. At the beginning of 69 AD, Rome finally had a new emperor, or so everyone believed. Galba had survived the fall of Nero and entered the capital promising discipline, honesty, and stability. After years of extravagance under Nero, many senators welcomed the elderly general as the man who could restore the dignity of the empire. But beneath the calm surface, Rome was already beginning to crack. Galba had ruled for only a few months, yet almost every powerful group in the empire had found a reason to dislike him. The senators considered him too harsh. The people thought he was cold and distant. The Praetorian Guard felt betrayed after being denied the rewards they had been promised. And the legions stationed on the frontiers wondered why they should obey an emperor who had done nothing for them. The greatest danger, however, stood much closer to Galba than anyone realized. His name was Marcus Salvius Otho. Otho had once been one of Nero's closest companions. The two men had enjoyed extravagant banquets, horse races, and theatrical performances together. Their friendship seemed unbreakable until Nero became fascinated with Otho's beautiful wife, Poppaea Sabina. The emperor divorced his own wife, forced Otho to give up Poppaea, then married her himself. To remove his former friend from Rome, Nero appointed Otho governor of Lusitania in modern-day Portugal. Many believed Otho would spend the rest of his career forgotten on the edge of the empire. Instead, fate offered him another opportunity. When Galba rebelled against Nero, Otho immediately joined him. He provided money, political support, and loyal soldiers. Many assumed that Galba, grateful for this loyalty, would eventually name Otho as his successor. Otho certainly believed so. He waited patiently. He stayed close to the emperor. He supported every public appearance. He expected that one day the imperial purple would naturally pass to him. Then everything changed. Galba knew he was old. At 70 years of age, he needed an heir. Rome expected him to choose one quickly to prevent another succession crisis. Instead of selecting Otho, Galba chose a young nobleman named Lucius Calpurnius Piso Licinianus. Piso was respected, honest, well-educated, and completely unexpected. When Galba publicly adopted Piso as his son and announced him as the future emperor, Otho was devastated. Years of loyalty had earned him nothing. Everything he believed he had worked toward vanished in a single ceremony. To Otho, this was more than an insult. It was betrayal. If Galba would not give him the throne, he would take it. Otho understood one important truth about Roman politics. The emperor was not always chosen by the Senate, nor by the people. Sometimes he was chosen by whichever soldiers stood closest to him. Those soldiers were the Praetorian Guard. Stationed inside Rome itself, they protected the imperial palace and accompanied the emperor everywhere. Their loyalty could make or destroy an emperor. Unlike Galba, Otho knew exactly what they wanted: money. He secretly promised every guardsman an enormous reward if they helped place him on the throne. The guard accepted. The conspiracy was ready. Only one thing remained. The emperor had to die. On the morning of January 15th, 69 AD, Galba left the imperial palace to perform official duties in the Roman Forum. As always, the city bustled with activity. Merchants shouted across crowded streets. Citizens hurried through the marketplaces. Senators traveled with their servants. No one realized they were about to witness another emperor's death. Suddenly, mounted soldiers from the Praetorian Guard surrounded Galba. At first, confusion spread through the crowd. Had enemies attacked? Was this merely an escort? Then swords were drawn. Panic erupted. Galba, now 70 years old, understood immediately what was happening. According to ancient writers, the emperor did not beg for his life. Instead, he reportedly offered his neck and declared, "Strike, if it serves Rome." Moments later, he was cut down. His adopted heir, Piso, attempted to escape through the streets. He never made it. The assassins found him hiding inside a temple and killed him as well. Within minutes, Rome had lost another emperor. Galba's severed head was carried through the streets on the tip of a spear. Crowds gathered in disbelief. Only 7 months earlier, Nero had ruled. Now Galba was dead. The empire had entered a terrifying cycle. Every emperor seemed to survive only until someone stronger appeared. The Praetorian Guard immediately proclaimed Otho emperor. The Senate, terrified of suffering the same fate as Galba, quickly approved the decision. Many senators privately disliked Otho. Some considered him another version of Nero, but refusing meant death. So they accepted him. For the second time in less than a year, Rome had a new emperor. Yet Otho knew his greatest challenge had not even begun. Because far from the capital, another man had already been proclaimed emperor. His name was Aulus Vitellius. While Rome struggled with palace conspiracies, events along the Rhine frontier had taken a dangerous turn. The legions stationed in Germania were among the toughest soldiers in the empire. For decades, they had fought fierce Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine River. They believed they were Rome's finest warriors. Yet Galba had ignored them. Their commanders felt insulted. Their soldiers felt forgotten. On January 1st, 69 AD, before Galba had even been assassinated, the German legions refused to swear loyalty to him. The following day, they proclaimed their own commander, Vitellius, emperor. Vitellius was not considered a brilliant military genius. He was known more for his generosity, humor, and love of extravagant feasts than for tactical brilliance. But he possessed one enormous advantage. He had the support of powerful armies. More than 70,000 experienced soldiers now marched under his banners. Unlike Otho, who relied heavily on the Praetorian Guard, Vitellius commanded hardened frontier legions. These men had spent years fighting real wars. Now they marched toward Italy, not to defend Rome, but to conquer it. News traveled slowly in the ancient world. By the time Otho secured control of Rome, Vitellius' armies were already crossing the Alps. Civil war had become unavoidable. Roman would fight Roman. Legion would fight legion. Neither side wanted compromise. Each believed only one emperor could survive. Otho understood that waiting inside Rome would be a mistake. He gathered every available force: Praetorian guards, urban cohorts, marines from the imperial fleet. Unlike some rulers who preferred to command safely from behind palace walls, Otho intended to share the dangers faced by his soldiers. But courage alone could not guarantee victory. The two armies finally met near the small village of Bedriacum in northern Italy. It was April of 69 AD. Thousands of Roman soldiers stood facing one another across open fields. Many had served together years earlier. Some had fought side by side against barbarian tribes. Now they prepared to kill former comrades. No foreign enemy watched from the sidelines. This was a Roman civil war. The battle began with disciplined formations. Heavy infantry advanced behind massive rectangular shields. Pilum spears flew through the air before the legions closed for brutal hand-to-hand combat. Swords clashed. Standards waved above the chaos. Trumpets echoed across the battlefield. For hours the outcome remained uncertain. Otho's forces fought fiercely, but Vitellius' experienced Rhine legions slowly gained the advantage. Years of frontier warfare had hardened them into some of the empire's most effective fighting forces. One by one, Otho's units began collapsing. The line broke. The retreat became a rout. Thousands of Romans died beneath Roman swords. The first battle of Bedriacum was over. Vitellius had won. When news reached Otho, many of his surviving officers urged him to continue fighting. Fresh reinforcements were approaching. Additional legions remained loyal. Another battle was possible, perhaps even victory. But Otho looked around at the exhausted survivors. Thousands of Romans had already died because two men wanted the same throne. He refused to sacrifice more lives. On the morning of April 16, 69 AD, after saying farewell to his closest friends, Otho entered his tent. He lay down calmly on his bed, then drove a dagger into his own chest. Unlike Nero, who had fled in panic, Otho accepted responsibility for ending the conflict, at least the conflict he believed he had started. Ancient historian Tacitus later wrote that Otho's final act earned him greater respect than his entire life before becoming emperor. His soldiers mourned him deeply. Some even took their own lives beside his funeral pyre, unwilling to serve another ruler. It was a remarkable display of loyalty in an age defined by betrayal. With Otho dead, the Senate had little choice. Vitellius was recognized as the new emperor. For the third time in less than a year, Rome welcomed another ruler. Vitellius entered the capital surrounded by victorious soldiers. Triumphal celebrations filled the streets. Many hoped that, at last, the civil war had ended. But while Vitellius celebrated his victory in Rome, nearly 2,000 kilometers away, another general was quietly gathering support. A commander whose victories in the east had already made him one of Rome's greatest military leaders. His name was Vespasian, and before the year was over, he would march on Rome. Vespasian's march to Rome. By the summer of 69 AD, Emperor Vitellius believed the worst was over. Galba was dead. Otho was dead. His own armies had defeated every major rival. The Senate had recognized him as the legitimate ruler of Rome. For many citizens, it seemed that peace had finally returned. But while celebrations filled the streets of the capital, another struggle for power was quietly unfolding far to the east. In the rugged hills of Judea, a veteran general named Titus Flavius Vespasianus, better known simply as Vespasian, was fighting a very different war. He had no idea that history was about to place the Roman Empire in his hands. Unlike Nero, Otho, or Vitellius, Vespasian had never been known for luxury or political ambition. He came from a relatively modest family compared to Rome's old aristocracy. His father had been a tax collector. His family possessed wealth, but not the ancient prestige of the great Roman noble houses. Everything Vespasian achieved came through military service. He had fought in the invasion of Britain under Emperor Claudius in 43 AD, earning a reputation as a disciplined and practical commander. His soldiers respected him because he shared their hardships. He marched with them. He endured bad weather alongside them. He understood logistics, engineering, and siege warfare better than almost anyone in the Roman army. Unlike many ambitious politicians, Vespasian rarely sought attention. He preferred results over speeches. When the Jewish revolt erupted in 66 AD, Nero selected Vespasian to crush the rebellion. It was one of the most difficult military campaigns Rome had faced in decades. Fortified cities covered the hills of Judea. Jewish rebels fought fiercely, defending every stronghold. Vespasian responded with methodical precision. Rather than rushing into costly battles, he slowly isolated rebel positions, cut supply routes, and forced cities to surrender one by one. By 69 AD, almost all of Judea had been reconquered. Only Jerusalem remained. Then news arrived from Rome. Nero was dead. Galba had fallen. Otho had become emperor. Otho had died. Vitellius now ruled the empire. The Roman world seemed to change faster than military messengers could deliver the news. Vespasian paused his campaign. The conquest of Judea suddenly became less important than the survival of the empire itself. Many Eastern governors watched the chaos in Rome with growing concern. They respected Vespasian. Unlike Vitellius, he had proven himself on the battlefield. Unlike Galba, he had years of active military experience. Unlike Otho, he had earned his reputation through victories rather than political maneuvering. One of the most influential men in the East, Tiberius Julius Alexander, the governor of Egypt, reached a critical conclusion. Vitellius was unlikely to restore stability. Rome needed another emperor. On July 1, 69 AD, the legions stationed in Egypt proclaimed Vespasian emperor. It was a turning point. Within days, the legions in Judea followed. Soon afterward, powerful armies stationed along the Danube also declared their support. For the third time that year, Roman soldiers had chosen a new ruler. This time, however, the balance of power was very different. Vespasian did not control only one region. He now commanded the wealthiest provinces in the empire. Perhaps his greatest advantage was Egypt. To modern audiences, Egypt is often remembered for its pyramids and ancient temples. To the Romans, it represented something even more valuable: food. Every year, enormous fleets carried grain from the fertile Nile Valley to Italy. Much of Rome's population depended on these shipments to survive. Without Egyptian grain, shortages would quickly develop. Bread prices would rise. Unrest would spread. Starvation could follow. Vespasian understood this perfectly. Rather than immediately marching west, he secured Egypt first. By controlling the empire's grain supply, he placed enormous pressure on Vitellius. It was a brilliant strategic decision. He could weaken his rival before a single major battle had even begun. Meanwhile, in Rome, Vitellius made a series of costly mistakes. Instead of strengthening the empire's finances after months of civil war, he spent lavishly on celebrations. Ancient historians describe extravagant banquets lasting for hours. Rare fish, exotic birds, expensive wines. Some accounts, even if likely exaggerated, claim that Vitellius spent astonishing sums on food while the empire struggled to recover from war. Whether every story is true remains uncertain. Roman historians often disliked defeated emperors and sometimes exaggerated their flaws. Still, there is little doubt that Vitellius became associated with excess at exactly the moment when Rome desperately needed discipline. His greatest error, however, involved the army. Confident after defeating Otho, Vitellius dismissed many experienced soldiers and rewarded loyal supporters with important commands. This weakened his military just as Vespasian's coalition was growing stronger. Many officers quietly began questioning whether they had chosen the right emperor. Rather than leading the campaign himself, Vespasian entrusted much of the military operation to one of his most capable generals, Marcus Antonius Primus. Primus commanded the Danubian legions, veterans who had spent years defending Rome's northern frontier. They moved quickly. Their goal was simple: reach Italy before Vitellius could fully organize his defenses. As Vespasian remained in the east to secure political support and ensure the grain supply continued under his control, Primus marched west with remarkable speed. The campaign surprised Vitellius. He had expected more time. Instead, enemy legions were already approaching northern Italy. Once again, Roman armies prepared to fight one another. In October of 69 AD, the opposing forces met near Bedriacum, the same area where Otho had suffered defeat only months earlier. The fields had barely recovered from the previous battle. Now they would witness another massacre. The Second Battle of Bedriacum proved even more devastating than the first. Fighting continued throughout the day and into the night. The darkness created chaos. Orders became difficult to hear. Units lost contact with one another. Torches illuminated desperate hand-to-hand combat as soldiers struggled to distinguish friend from foe. Despite fierce resistance, Vitellius' forces gradually collapsed. Many commanders surrendered. Others fled. Entire formations abandoned the battlefield. The victory belonged to Vespasian's supporters. For the second time that year, the road to Rome lay open. News of the defeat reached the capital with shocking speed. Panic spread. Some senators immediately switched their loyalty to Vespasian. Others urged Vitellius to abdicate peacefully in exchange for a safe retirement. At first, the emperor appeared willing to negotiate. He reportedly agreed to surrender his power. But many of his remaining supporters refused. They insisted on fighting. The opportunity for a peaceful transfer of power disappeared. Civil war entered its final and bloodiest stage. As Vespasian's armies approached the city, violence erupted inside Rome itself. The streets became battlefields. Barricades appeared across major roads. Supporters of Vitellius fought desperately to defend key positions. Temples that had stood for centuries suddenly became military strongholds. One of the greatest tragedies occurred on the Capitoline Hill, the spiritual heart of Rome. During fierce fighting, the magnificent temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus caught fire. This was no ordinary building. It was the most sacred temple in the Roman world. Generations of victorious generals had climbed its steps to thank Jupiter after military triumphs. For centuries, it had symbolized the power and protection of the Roman state. Now flames consumed its roof. Its wooden beams collapsed. Priceless religious treasures were destroyed. Many Romans watched in horror as the symbol of their civilization disappeared beneath smoke and fire. It felt as though the gods themselves had abandoned the empire. The battle for Rome continued house by house, street by street. Roman citizens hid inside their homes, while heavily armed legionaries fought outside their doors. Shops were looted. Buildings collapsed. The cries of civilians mixed with the clash of shields and swords. For generations, Roman armies had conquered distant lands. Now they were devastating their own capital. Ancient historians estimated that thousands died during the fighting, though the exact number remains unknown. What is certain is that the city suffered immense destruction. The empire that had defeated Carthage, conquered Greece, and humbled powerful kingdoms across Europe, Africa, and Asia was tearing itself apart from within. By late December, Vespasian's supporters controlled nearly all of Rome. Only one obstacle remained: Emperor Vitellius himself. His final hours would bring one of the most brutal endings ever suffered by a Roman ruler: the fall of Vitellius and the rise of Vespasian. By December of 69 AD, Rome no longer resembled the proud capital of the greatest empire on earth. Smoke drifted above the city. Entire districts had been scarred by street fighting. The magnificent temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, the spiritual heart of Rome, lay in ruins after the devastating fire. Thousands of Roman citizens had fled their homes. For nearly 18 months, the empire had known almost nothing except uncertainty, betrayal, and civil war. 3 emperors had already fallen. A fourth was about to join them. Inside the imperial palace, Emperor Vitellius faced a reality he could no longer ignore. His armies had been shattered at the Second Battle of Bedriacum. The Danubian legions loyal to Vespasian now controlled much of Italy. Many senators had abandoned him. Even some of his closest supporters quietly began negotiating with the enemy. Vitellius understood that the throne was slipping away. According to several ancient historians, he briefly considered giving up power voluntarily. Messengers traveled between both sides. Discussions began. The proposal was simple. Vitellius would abdicate peacefully. In return, he would receive a generous pension for a brief moment. It seemed the bloodshed might finally end. But the agreement never held. Many of Vitellius' remaining supporters refused to surrender. Some feared revenge if Vespasian took power. Others believed they could still defend the emperor. As emotions overtook reason, negotiations collapsed. Once again, Rome prepared for battle. Vespasian himself was still in the east, securing Egypt and organizing the empire. The final assault on Rome was carried out by his generals, led by Marcus Antonius Primus. Their soldiers entered the capital from several directions, determined to end the conflict before more provinces joined the chaos. What followed was among the fiercest urban battles in Roman history. Unlike open-field engagements where disciplined formations could maneuver, the narrow streets of Rome favored confusion. Barricades blocked major roads. Rooftops became defensive positions. Missiles rained down from upper floors. Legionaries fought inside temples, marketplaces, and private homes. Citizens barricaded themselves indoors, praying the violence would pass without reaching their families. The Eternal City had become a battlefield. Roman soldiers who had once marched together beneath the same standards now hunted one another through the streets they had sworn to protect. Vitellius' remaining supporters made one desperate stand around the imperial palace. For hours, fierce fighting echoed through the surrounding districts. Eventually, resistance collapsed. The emperor realized there was no longer any hope of victory. Ancient sources describe his final hours differently, but most agree on one detail. Vitellius attempted to hide. Some accounts claim he disguised himself in ordinary clothing. Others report that he concealed himself in the palace gatekeeper's quarters. Still others suggest he hid beneath a staircase. Whatever the exact location, it made little difference. The victors found him. Dragged from his hiding place, the emperor was brought before the soldiers. No mercy awaited him. Vitellius was forced through the streets of Rome while crowds gathered to witness the downfall of another emperor. Only months earlier, these same streets had celebrated his victory. Now they watched him as a defeated prisoner. Ancient historians describe insults shouted from every direction. Objects were thrown. The former ruler of the Roman world was humiliated before the people he had once governed. Finally, near the Gemonian Stairs, a place long associated with public executions, Vitellius was killed. His body was thrown into the Tiber River. With his death, the reign of the third emperor of 69 AD came to a violent end. In less than 1 year, Galba had been murdered. Otho had taken his own life. Vitellius had been executed. Only one claimant remained. News quickly spread throughout the empire. The Senate formally recognized Vespasian as the new emperor. Unlike his predecessors, Vespasian inherited an empire exhausted by civil war. The treasury was nearly empty. Many frontier defenses had been weakened as legions fought each other instead of defending Rome's borders. Entire cities required rebuilding. Confidence in the imperial government had been badly damaged. The Roman world needed more than another emperor. It needed stability. Fortunately for Rome, stability was exactly what Vespasian intended to provide. When Vespasian finally arrived in Rome in 70 AD, he wasted little time restoring order. One of his first priorities was rebuilding the empire's finances. Years of war had drained enormous sums of money. Rather than raising taxes to unbearable levels, Vespasian introduced practical reforms. Government spending became more disciplined. Corruption was reduced. Tax collection was reorganized. Although some of his policies proved unpopular, they gradually restored confidence in the imperial treasury. Vespasian also understood the importance of the army. The loyalty of the legions once again became tied to the stability of the empire instead of individual ambition. Perhaps Vespasian's greatest achievement was not military. It was symbolic. Instead of preserving Nero's private paradise, he ordered the lake drained. On that very site, construction began on one of history's most famous buildings, the Flavian Amphitheater. Today, the world knows it by another name, the Colosseum. Unlike Nero's palace, built for one man's pleasure, the Colosseum was intended for the people of Rome. Thousands would gather there to watch gladiatorial contests, animal hunts, dramatic performances, and public spectacles. It became a visible reminder that the new emperor wished to serve the public rather than glorify himself. Even today, nearly 2,000 years later, the Colosseum remains one of the most recognizable monuments ever built. Its foundations were laid because Vespasian chose reconstruction over revenge. Vespasian also completed the campaign in Judea that he had been forced to interrupt during the civil war. His eldest son, Titus, captured Jerusalem in 70 AD after a long and brutal siege. The victory strengthened the prestige of the new ruling family, now known as the Flavian dynasty. For the first time since Nero's death, Rome possessed a stable imperial succession. Vespasian ruled for nearly 10 years. When he died in 79 AD, his son Titus peacefully became emperor. After Titus, another son, Domitian, inherited the throne. The violent cycle of rapid successions had finally been broken. Looking back, the year of the four emperors lasted only 12 months. Yet during that single year, the Roman Empire came closer to collapse than at almost any other moment in its history. For different men claimed the throne. 3 emperors died violently. Roman legions slaughtered fellow Romans in battles that rivaled wars against foreign enemies. Sacred temples burned. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed. The authority of the Senate was exposed as weaker than ever before. Most importantly, one lesson became impossible to ignore. The emperor was no longer chosen by birth alone. He was chosen by the army. That realization would shape Roman politics for centuries. Whenever powerful generals controlled loyal legions, the possibility of civil war always remained. Yet from the chaos emerged one of Rome's most capable rulers. Vespasian did not inherit a flourishing empire. He inherited a broken one. Through discipline, practical reforms, careful financial management, and steady leadership, he restored confidence in the imperial government. His dynasty rebuilt Rome. His family completed the Colosseum. And his reign marked the beginning of a new era after one of the darkest chapters in Roman history. The year of the four emperors proved that Rome could conquer kingdoms, crush rebellions, and dominate continents. But its greatest threat was never beyond its frontiers. It came from within, because in the end, the most dangerous enemy Rome ever faced was Rome itself.